Hey guys, so I'm just going to use a few minutes to quickly demo another particle system that you can now try out. So I'm going to take a video clip, drop it into my timeline here. So I've got a composition with the video. The background video in this case doesn't really matter. I'm just using it to demonstrate, like I said, another particle system. So if I go to effects and presets and type in particle, so hopefully by this stage you've used Particle World and got a little bit familiar with it. It's a 2D particle system, which means while it has properties that affect the x, which is your width, and your y, which is your height, it has no z depth as such, so it doesn't really it doesn't move off into the distance as such. You can fake depth by using multiple particle systems to make some appear to be closer to the front and others further back. But really, it is only ever working in 2 dimensions. It doesn't have any kind of 3D element to it at all. So if you look at the next one up, which is Particle World, that's exactly what that is. It's a 3D particle system this time around. And it's nice to get into it after having used Particle Playground because you'll find that it actually works in a very similar way. Most particle systems do. However, there are a few additional controls it also has, but that's not too difficult to kind of work out and sort of see what they do. But the key fundamentals are identical, so that's great. So you'll see that it works very similarly to Particle Playground. If I drop it over a video clip, the video clip disappears because the particle system needs a layer to operate on top of. So I'm going to undo that for a second. So if we're using a particle system, it's best to create a new layer specifically for it by going Layer, New, Solid. I normally recommend you name your layers after whatever is going to go on there. So if you're going to use a particle system to create smoke or snow, things like that, you would call it such. I'm just demonstrating the particle, so I will call it that. So I've got a layer that will now allow me that I can put my particle world on this time instead. And you'll see there it is. And you'll see it shoots out these particles from a cannon, very similar to what Particle Playground was doing. For now, I'm going to turn the background video off. So I don't have to see that. And yeah, you'll see, like I said, it is doing something very similar to Particle Playground. However, Particle Playground was shooting particles up and they were falling down. Here, by default, the particles are shooting out straight towards you. So again, like I said, it's 3D, and so particles can come towards you as well or move away from you. So looking over on the left here in our effect controls, these are our properties. And you'll see it has things like a birth rate, which is basically the amount of particles you have. So we can increase the number of particles we want. And obviously you can see we've got a lot more now. Or we can decrease it and bring it all the way down. So we're producing very few. Okay. So I'll just stick that back. And then we have the longevity underneath, which says seconds. So that's set to 1 second at the moment. And you can see I can increase that. Obviously, it probably won't make much of a difference because I think the particles have probably disappeared off the screen within a second's time. Okay. However, you might find that what is changing, however, so like I said, so increasing it doesn't do anything because they're kind of staying there anyway. But if I decrease it, notice what will happen is if I shorten their lives, the color starts to change as well. Okay, so they start to go from yellow to a bit more red. Whereas if I increase it, it sort of goes a bit more yellow. And the reason for that is because if we go to the particle property here, okay, down here you have a birth color and a death color. So Particle Playground had a color as well, but it was like a single color only. Here you can choose the color the particle is when it's first created and a color it changes to as it dies. So right now it's yellow and red, but again, I could make it any color I want to once it's going to die. And you can see now it's getting a bit colder. And again, if I shorten the life, it'll become more blue. So how could this work in a practical example? Well, again, if you're creating smoke, for example, you may want it to start off quite white, perhaps, or sorry, quite dark, perhaps. Maybe it's quite a darkish grey, and then as it starts to spread out, as it moves away, you want it to go lighter in color, and so it starts to become more white. So you could do that. So you could change or pick a specific birth color, which might be quite dark. On here, that probably won't work so well because I've got a dark background, right? But yeah, you could pick a specific color for that, and then it changes to something else naturally. Okay, so yeah, that's what that's for. I'm just going to change the color back for now, for simplicity's sake. So that's kind of your birth, the longevity of the particles, and then the colors that they sort of become. After that, you've got things like, if you're as a producer, you've got the sort of overall scale and position that you can change. So again, if you think of Particle Playground, it just had a one specific radius which just grew. Here, the radius can change on the X, on the Y, going up and down, and on the Z. So particles will actually move towards us or away from us as well. So it has quite a few more properties here than Particle Playground did. Okay, and the position, same thing. You can move it left and right, up and down, or away from us or towards the viewer as well. Okay, so you have all of those properties there to give you a bit more control again than Particle Playground allowed. So I'm just wondering if we should start with the particle now that we've kind of looked at that. Yeah, so I mentioned the birth and death color. I guess one of the other things is you've got by default is the particle type. So right now it's just shooting out lines. You can change it to sort of other types of objects. A lot of these are just quite unusual, and you might be like, what am I going to use that for? Well, some things, perhaps like the spheres or so on, can work quite well sometimes if you want things to be bundled together. So imagine that included with a lot of particles, or actually rather than the shaded sphere, there we go, faded one is better. Yeah, and you can see it's starting to become a bit more sort of liquid-like, or mimic that look. So yeah, you may choose a different type of particle in order to create a specific object. And so inside physics are your kind of typical settings that relate to the velocity, the speed of the particles, gravity is obviously how quick it's pulling it down. So you can see we can adjust the gravity so it's shooting those up instead. So we can adjust all of these kind of settings here. Now, if I just undo that for a second as well. So obviously while you can play with these settings at the angle, see we can kind of, say that. It looks like so look if you can adjust that angle. No, okay, so the angle doesn't seem to want to do that. Resistance is obviously going to pull it in a bit closer, so it's I guess that's tied in with the gravity, and so it's not allowing the particles to sort of shoot out as wide. So yeah, so you can kind of have a look at some of those. They're all keyframeable, but you'll also see there's an animation setting here, which by default is set to explosive, so it's sort of exploding the particles out, but you can change that by default. So rather than going through these settings to adjust it to where you want, you can begin with one of the presets. So you can see it's got one called fire, where it's at least putting it into a position that is sort of getting it ready for it to sort of mimic a flame. You can then go in and adjust that. I think you'll see that vortex as well kind of obviously does tie together and has it spinning around and so on. So you can also choose those properties there. Okay, so yeah, so we have those properties there, and I think that's kind of the key things that I wanted to introduce that tie into what you've already looked at. What I would say is one of the other things you do have, in physics is a floor, which can be quite useful. So this grid here acts as the floor. The grid itself does not show up in any renders, okay, so you won't see that all these lines, okay, which are there to help you with positioning. Only thing you'll see are the particles. However, the floor has no action at all, okay. At the moment you can see it's set to none, but we can change that. So if I change it to say ice, particles, once they hit that floor, will slide along it, okay, like they would on ice, and you can see it's kind of doing that there. Okay, whereas glue will make those stick. That's probably more closer to mimicking sort of what rain kind of would do as it hits. You can see it for a little bit before it disappears, because obviously the longevity, once it's got to the end of its life, it will disappear. And then you have things like bounce. So as it hits, it will sort of just bounce along, and that can help when you're putting in particles into a real scene, and you might want them to sort of interact with objects within the scene. So I haven't done any of that at this stage. In fact, rather than let's go back into our particle. Let me just change that to a cube or something, which might be a bit easier to see. But yeah, you can adjust your floor height and so on as well. So you can also adjust the sort of the bounciness and things like that if that's kind of what you've gone for. Let's just reduce those particles down a bit. But yeah, so what you can do, like I said, is you can align your floor. So there's our floor position. So it's just really an up and down property, but we can kind of set that up where we sort of want it to be, and then at least that way when particles sort of hit it, they'll bounce. And like I said, you won't see the floor itself, but it can sort of create I guess it creates that interaction a little bit between the virtual objects and the real ones. Okay, so those are a few things you can do with Particle World. There's obviously a lot more properties as you can see in here, but encourage you to give that a go. Perhaps trying out one of our previous exercises that we've already done with Particle Playground, but this time seeing how you could achieve a similar result using Particle World. Okay, thanks for watching.